The shovel hit something hard. At first, the worker thought it was just a root or a buried rock beneath the suburban backyard. But as the soil fell away, the shape became clearer. Too smooth, too curved, too fragile to be stone. Within minutes, what appeared to be the remains of a human skull were staring back up at him. The yard was swarming with police tape before nightfall, and whispers spread quickly across the neighborhood. Someone had been living above a grave, and that grave had been hidden for more than 2 decades. Susan Goodwin's name had long been a ghost in the files of the local police department. 23 years earlier, she was reported missing by a colleague after failing to show up for work at a small financial services office where she was known to be punctual and reliable. Susan wasn't the type of woman who disappeared easily. At 41, she was independent, meticulous, and deeply rooted in her community. She lived in a quiet suburb where neighbors exchanged greetings over hedges and children played freely in cul-de-sacs. Though never married, Susan was known as the type of woman who mothered everyone, especially the younger employees in her office. She organized office birthdays, remembered co-workers' children's names, and showed up to church every Sunday with a homemade casserole for the post-service luncheon. When she didn't show up one Monday morning in September 2000, colleagues assumed she might have fallen ill. By Tuesday, unease was growing, and by Wednesday, one of them called the police. The officers who arrived at her modest brick home found little amiss. Her car was in the driveway. The front door was locked. Inside, the house was tidy, her bed neatly made. The only oddity was her handbag, sitting by the kitchen table, with her wallet and keys still inside. It was as though she had simply vanished into thin air. Police canvassed the area. Neighbors recalled seeing her mowing her lawn the Saturday before. One neighbor remembered a man's voice raised in anger late that evening, but no one could say who it belonged to. At the time, investigators treated Susan's disappearance as a possible voluntary missing persons case. She had no immediate family. Her parents were deceased, and she had no. When she didn't show up one Monday morning in September 2000, colleagues assumed she might have fallen ill. By Tuesday, unease was growing, and by Wednesday, one of them called the police. The officers who arrived at her modest brick home found little amiss. Her car was in the driveway. The front door was locked. Inside, the house was tidy, her bed neatly made. The only oddity was her handbag, sitting by the kitchen table, with her wallet and keys still inside. It was as though she had simply vanished into thin air. Police canvassed the area. Neighbors recalled seeing her mowing her lawn the Saturday before. One neighbor remembered a man's voice raised in anger late that evening, but no one could say who it belonged to. At the time, investigators treated Susan's disappearance as a possible voluntary missing persons case. She had no immediate family. Her parents were deceased, and she had no siblings. There was no one to insist to police that this wasn't like her. No one to demand press conferences or keep her photo on billboards. For a while, she was just another name in a file, another adult who'd seemingly chosen to walk away. But those who knew Susan doubted she'd ever leave voluntarily. She was reliable to a fault, said one former co-worker years later. If she said she'd be there, she was there. For her to vanish, it wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. As months turned into years, and years turned into decades, her case slipped into the cold storage of unsolved mysteries. But time has a way of forcing secrets to the surface, even when buried beneath layers of dirt. In the decades that followed Susan's disappearance, her old house changed hands multiple times. Families moved in and out, repainting walls, planting gardens, building decks over the backyard soil that quietly concealed the truth. Each new homeowner lived unaware of the secret just feet beneath their feet. It wasn't until the summer of 2023 that everything changed. The property had recently been sold again, this time to a young couple excited to renovate the dated home into their forever house. Contractors arrived with plans to expand the patio and install a new drainage system. The work was routine until the digging began. One laborer, focused on breaking through a stubborn patch of ground at the far corner of the yard, struck something unusual. The soil there was oddly compacted, almost as if it had been disturbed long ago. As the shovel pried deeper, he unearthed fragments, white, brittle, unmistakably bone. The crew froze. At first, they debated whether it could be animal remains. But as more fragments surfaced, the shape of a human skull was undeniable. A call was made, and within hours the backyard was swarming with detectives, forensic specialists, and crime scene tape that fluttered in the summer heat. News traveled fast. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, whispering and pointing. Some recalled the mysterious disappearance of a woman decades earlier, but few could remember her name. Others spoke in hushed tones about the man she was last seen with, though no one seemed to know who he was. Police worked carefully, cordoning off the area and excavating what would turn out to be a shallow grave. Inside it were human remains, fragile but largely intact, alongside scraps of clothing so deteriorated they crumbled at a touch. The body had been wrapped in what looked like old bedsheets, now stained and brittle with age. By late afternoon, detectives were already drawing the obvious conclusion. This was no ordinary burial. This was a crime scene. Back at headquarters, old case files were pulled, photographs of missing persons reviewed. It didn't take long before one name rose to the top: Susan Goodwin. As the sun dipped below the horizon that day, casting long shadows over the yard, a detective knelt beside the unearthed remains. "If this is who we think it is," he muttered, "someone's been hiding a secret for 23 years. The forensic team would need weeks to confirm the identity, but whispers in the department were already certain. Susan Goodwin had been found, and she hadn't walked away voluntarily. What no one could have predicted, however, was that uncovering Susan's body would reopen a tangled web of lies, betrayals, and long-forgotten grudges. Because if Susan had been murdered, then someone had been living quietly, undetected, all these years, knowing exactly where her body lay. And the first clue pointing to that person was about to shock investigators to their core.